Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you won't see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you're listening to Jams and Tea.
Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast where we spin the jams and spill the tea, and this is the one you have all been waiting for. This is the Jams and Tea Podcast's best albums of 2020 list. We have cumulatively combined what we believe to be the best 20 albums of this year, and we are going to talk about what we believe they are, regardless of whether or not we have covered them on the show, and then afterwards, briefly, we are going to give our own top 10 favorite albums of the year lists.
Okay, so without any further fuck, let's kick off our list with number 20, which is...
Dreamsicle on a summer night in a folding lawn chair.
This album is pretty uniformly fantastic. Finds Isbell and the 400 Units sort of exploring and embracing new soundscapes within their mold. And it's really, it sounds amazing, which I think is something that kind of goes unsung when Isbell is brought up generally. It's just how much of a fucking incredible job that Dave Cobb does with these albums. And I think this one in particular is his most impressive in that regard.
This is, I believe, the second album with the 400 unit. Am I right?
It's the fourth, but it's the second one that anybody remembers.
Okay. No, that's cool. I just want to say that I appreciate, especially listening to this, the way that Jason's sound is kind of expanded without changing dramatically since like the earliest stuff that I've heard from him. Like, I think, you know, you could make a solid case. Like, this is, I guess, in essence, a country record, but you could make a solid case that it's not really. It's more kind of like Americana and alternative rock, and like at times I think when listening to it, this might be a far-fetched comparison, but it made me think of like the War on Drugs.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I
I would
definitely
see that.
And that I think is a really cool kind of like sonic comparison to be making with an Isbell record at this point. I like the way that he's kind of expanding his sound a little bit more, and you, because it opens with like a sweeping 6-minute epic that kind of like goes through these different sections and has this kind of hook that kind of keeps the whole thing grounded. And I look forward to seeing if Jason kind of explores more progressive structures. I mean, relatively speaking anyway, for an Americana record on subsequent stuff, but it also has like the more stripped back and plaintive moments like Only Children and Letting You Go that are just like stop you in your tracks and you're like, damn, that's a song right there.
This motherfucker knows how to put some words together.
Yeah.
And have them over fucking musical motif.
Oh my.
Absolutely. All right, number 19 on our list is...
For a long time, I'm very into a genre of folk punk, which I've talked about a few times already on this podcast. And there came a point where I discovered that one of my favorite folk punk bands had released a new album, and no one bothered to tell me. That being Days and Days, who are maybe most famous for their song Misanthropic Drunken Loner, which is iconic if you've ever heard it. And I liked it so much, I did this and got it on vinyl. And it sounds great on vinyl. This is their first record on a label, despite the fact this is not any, even in the first 5 records they've made.
Sellouts.
You say that.
I'm just kidding.
But
it's a joke. Don't
But
worry.
it's interesting you say that for reasons we've already talked about on the B-side series we've done, because this was done on Fat Records, Fat Mike's label.
Yes. Known major label, Fat Records.
I know, but it's a label for which, against me, got lambasted for moving out of folk punk to record on.
Yeah,
that is cool.
That's
This is still a folk punk record, though, and what I really like about it is, whereas a lot of their previous music has felt exciting for embracing the sort of loneliness of being a very, very micro-budget folk punk band who just drinks on all of the tours, fucks about and hates people. That's what we write about, and we're just expressing authentically that appeal. This actually feels like a record about moving forward and getting better. Specifically, songs like My Darling Dopamine, which is one of my top 10 songs of the year, and The Closer, which feel like saying goodbye to a way of life that is destructive and trying to find out how to be better people. And that really resonated with me in 2020.
Okay, moving on our list to number 18, and Saoirse, you have another record introduced to us.
I do. And it's a record called
I fuck with black magic, yeah. I fuck with black magic, yeah. I love the bad magic, yeah. I love the bad magic, yeah. Fuck with the mathematics, yeah.
This is the first record I gave above an 8, and I gave it a 9.5 on this podcast. It is like horrorcore through and through, but it's still very deeply emotional. The way the Backwash approaches the theme of being trans is astonishing. I could not get over the emotions I felt listening to this for the first 7 listens of the record. I know it's only 20-something minutes long. We talked about this when we reviewed it, but there was enough packed into those 20 minutes to fill up a full album of ideas. And I think the fact that it's so compact only makes it more viscerally exciting, and it means that it gives him so much more on re-listens. Songs like Devi McCallion's hook on Spells, or the Into the Void.
Black magic, yeah!
Oh, black magic, yeah!
I go into the void. Oh my god. It's like if hip-hop was metal at the same time, and the fact that it samples Ozzy Osbourne going crazy has nothing to do with that.
Oh god, no!
What?
Please,
God,
help me!
The past 30 to 45 seconds is some of the best this podcast has ever been. I just want that.
I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
It's just
God.
so hard.
Yeah, I feel
It
like
is.
my
No, it's been one of
Good.
my most returned to releases of the year. It's so easy to consume, but also just it's just got so much there. There's something for everybody. Go fucking support her. She makes great music.
Absolutely. Although I will say her album is, in the UK at least, no longer on Spotify as it was at the beginning. Only on Bandcamp.
Camp.
Yeah, which is I will release my album on Spotify, but all my singles are only on Bandcamp. Go buy Backwash's album on Bandcamp. Support her. Support trans artists on Bandcamp like Backwash and Black Dresses and Debbie McCallion and Nada Rook. Go do it.
Yes, agree. I just want to say, Saoirse, that with the greatest of respect, it was funny how you said her album's not on Spotify. I will be releasing my album.
Hey, that's hilarious.
Expert level. Just
Anyway.
And they say we're not good at segues.
I will in no way hold up whatever I make to her. She is much more. Her music is way better and amazing.
But is it on Spotify like your album will be?
Oh,
Exactly.
Let's move on.
Yeah. Let's move on now to number 17 on our list, which is it is the first, but not the last album Boris released this year. They actually just released a collaborative record with Merzbow, which is
Great.
awesome. Very good. But that was a record which is actually contains older songs of theirs and covers that they reinterpreted alongside Merzbow. Whereas No, I believe, is entirely new material. Definitely their standout release of the year. But No immediately stands out for the way in which it just feels immediate and vital in a way in which, this is not slandering recent Boris records, but No has a kind of sense of urgency to it that we haven't really had from a new Boris record in a while. It's really sludgy, but it's also has a lot of that punk energy of some of their most fast-paced material. It's just noisy and gritty, and at times it's entirely overwhelming, and it feels like it's trying to destroy you. and rip your brain apart. It's incredibly efficient with time as well. I believe it's like a really short record. And it's absolutely something I would recommend to people who want an idea of what Boris do. It's not as indebted to the drone metal style of their more well-known earlier work. But if, for example, you're a fan of Pink, which melds that drony, sludgy stuff with some of the faster-paced punk material, then you'll probably be really on board with No. Really, really stellar release, and it's awesome to see Boris sounding this urgent, immediate, and relevant and interesting this deep into their 20-plus year career.
Just contains everything I love about like heavy music. It has fucking monolithic doom metal riffs. It has fucking hardcore crust punk, fucking invigorating blood boiling shit that just makes you want to fucking go. It's so good. I love it again is a testament to the quality of music this year that is not a top 5 of the year album for me, because I love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it.
All right, rattling on down the list some more, we have another banger album at number 16.
Back at it like a crack addict, Mr. Black Magic, crack a bitch back, chiropractic, craftmatic, big daddy smoking big, Cali in a black alley in a black granddaddy rolling down.
This shit is just horde. Was this the first 10? This was the first 10 that anybody gave on the podcast, right?
It was
Yeah, it
you
was, yeah.
that gave it too.
Yes. I stand by it. Because it rules. It's just some of the best production on a hip hop album of the last 10 years.
But my thing with RTJ3 was, like, thematically a great record, has some incredible highlights, but it's also, I feel, a bit bloated and kind of it kind of goes in circles at certain points as well. And I was kind of like, I didn't doubt they could make a good record, but I was unsure how they were going to do that. And RTJ4, it definitely took the year for me to really process it, but I do think this is maybe their best record. And I didn't think that. I remember saying I didn't think that when we reviewed it, but I do think it now. It's just the most tight and urgent and packed set of songs. There's not a single weak one in the bunch, but it's also an album that does ebb and flow in a way that allows it to move from song to song, such that it's not like overwhelming. It's like a really cohesive journey. And yeah.
It's like, even especially with the passage of time, it's continuously impressive to me just how capably this album manages to mix sort of the addressing issues in a real manner and sort of contemplating them and thinking about them, while also just being it's like the most fun I've had with an album all year. It's just a good time, except when Mavis Staples sings and it's like, oh God.
No, fuck.
Speaking of amazing rap music from this year,
I'm a slow burn, crawl around the road, work something from the other side, clawing at the known world. Cup up all your cookies with the autumn incarnate heel city. By the time your eyes adjusted to the darkness.
You know, I don't know who exactly was like a big fan of this when it came out. A couple people might have had this on their list, and that's why it got up here or something. I don't know, but this record is just. I mean, I will like not to knock RTJ for anything, because that is a baller fucking time. It's a good album to throw on and just fucking knock your trunk to it. But if I have to pick the album that I had the most fun with hip hop wise this year, it would be this one, mainly because it is Aesop at the pinnacle of his lyrical powers, just absolute pen game undefeated, quite frankly. Dude spits nothing but fire, and the production, all done by him, is just genuinely so fucking outstanding. Creative beat after creative beat, hooks like he has never been able to deliver before, and a really, really great concept that just sort of makes all of this sort of flow together in a very satisfying but very, like, quintessentially imagination-oriented way that like really pulled me in. That's the thing about this album that I love so much, is that it's so colorful and vivid, and but also very deeply personal, but it's never like miring you in all of these problems and anxieties. It's just, it's presenting them for what they are, and it's a blast. It's one of Aesop's best projects, if you ask me.
But speaking of records, Jake is introducing.
Oh my god!
Number 14 on our list is...
Yeah. I would say that After Hours is the pinnacle of what he is capable of as an artist. I've gotten into him very much so this year. I would also like to say, if you should obviously watch our songs video, but a lot of like my connection to this album ran very unexpectedly deep. This is very high on my overall first favorites list, to the point where it was my number one until maybe halfway through the year. And yeah, my connection to this album is a lot like Tyler's connection to How I'm Feeling Now by Charlie XCX, and just Forever specifically, is that this album sort of became the soundtrack to my loneliness for the first part of the year. The fact that it is immaculately produced, one of the best produced albums of the year, I still stand by. It sort of opens with these very typical but still nonetheless lush, open, fucking polished, bright synth throwback songs that are still very in keeping with The Weeknd. But the thing he does on this album that makes it so great is that he goes away from that a little bit and goes into straight synth pop with like no holds barred, with songs like Blinding Lights, or songs like the one I talked about earlier, which is In Your Eyes. But it also has songs like the title track, which is just a really interesting left turn for Abel as an artist, where he's just sort of combining all of these things that he's done. It's a beautiful sounding record. It contains a lot of untapped emotional content that he previously hasn't touched on, like on songs like Snow Angel, which are just like devastating to listen to. And the fact that he's been able to sort of hone this persona and phase of his career so definitively, just kind of like that, is so... like I'm just really interested to see what he's going to go with next. I think this is like Tyler. I remember, just tangentially, when you tweeted about Punisher when it first came out, you said that it was this generation's, like, it was like when being around when Joni Mitchell dropped Blue. Well, if I can make a statement for After Hours here, this is like the Purple Rain of the 2020s. IMO. I think it doesn't have a miss on it. I've listened to it dozens of times. I love every single fucking song. It has amazing sonic palettes, and it's so easy to get lost in, and it's like it's a breakup album. It's an album about heartbreak and loneliness and all that shit. And if that sounds like it'll appeal to you, it really will. It's a very nocturnal record, and I am shocked I've listened to anything more than I've listened to this year.
Yeah, I think it is comfortably, by some margin actually, my favorite thing The Weeknd has done. It feels like an arrival. It is the most conceptually unified, but also the most conceptually interesting, and has a depth to it that his previous kind of like records, which wallow in kind of like, just the nastiest shit, and I don't really care for them. They're kind of, that kind of stuff is just, it's recontextualized here into some kind of like battle that you witness him winning in real time.
Yep.
And I think that's so wonderful. And the sound of it is fantastic. Has some of the best singles of the year. It just flows effortlessly from front to back. But yeah, what you get with this album is just an incredible display of how well Abel works over a variety of different instrumental palettes. And in a variety of different modes, some of which are familiar for long-time listeners and some of which are new. And it's just such an awesome and cohesive statement. Let's move on now to number 13 on our list, which is...
For me, a record that takes the group's greatest qualities and just expands upon them. It is a very melodic record. It's just such an easy record to sink into the groove of it, the fun synthesizer sounds of it. I quite frankly just find it such an easy album to put on in almost any mood and just listen to, because it is so it's got such a great sense of forward motion to it. It's such a fun, energizing album that came right at the dawn of the pandemic. It felt like something I absolutely needed in those times, and it is still something that I occasionally go back and listen to, because it is it's just a record that gets me into a happy mood.
Well, let's move on then to our number 12 on this list, which is...
I woke up, it was 4 a.m, clear as all hell that you'd already gone.
I've had conversations with Tyler that we would go into on future episodes about maybe the pros and cons of this record, but for me, the cons matter less and less every time I listen to it. Opening with a song like Alexandra, which feels like a more old school Laura Marling song with more pep, in that it explores mythology in a way that compares to modern womanhood in a way, and just living today. Like the lyric, like, why should I die so that you could live, feels real pertinent to where modern feminism is at. And the second track, Held Down, a song that's her most explicitly horny since Soothing. But it's not as purely horny as Soothing. It's more about a relationship in a way in which the sexual dynamic is purely entwined with the emotional one, and it's about dominance and subordinance in a relationship, and it's about giving to your partner and your partner giving to you, and about reaching a sort of synergy with your partner. I could go on like this track by track, but that's going to be done later in the show. I love this record. It is soft, it is emotional, it is fun when it wants to be, it is just real cute, and it makes me feel feelings, and I love it. And this is the final, which has a wonderful sort of flecked white print, if you can see that. It's absolutely gorgeous. I recommend it.
Tasty.
Pretty,
All right.
pretty baller.
Number 11 on our list is...
These guys they've been making noise. They've been making noise in the sort of avant black metal scene for a good while now. And they've had, like, their last couple records have been really acclaimed, and so it was no surprise that this one kind of got immediate fanfare when it came out. And I just sort of put off listening to it just because it's like fucking avant jazz fusion black metal shit. This sounds dense and impenetrable, and I'll probably like it, but I don't want to listen to it right now. So I waited until last second when I was doing my catch-up of this year to hear it, which is why it came up on my list so late. But now that it's here, it's perfect. Listening to this is one of the most interesting musical experiences I've had in a good long while. It is fucking unhinged. This is black metal that will claw its way inside you and rip you apart from the inside out. It has the instrumental variety of a Mars Volta album. It has the heaviness of something like it has heaviness and progressive tendencies that you wouldn't find unlike, an earlier Opeth record. There's so much shit happening, and yet it overwhelms you in a way that I can only find enjoyable. And it's very much a it's infused with this sort of futurism and storytelling and narrative progression about its themes of exploitation, dehumanization, capitalism, and just like the evils of the world, just sort of like weighing down the modern man, sort of entrenched in this like metropolis kind of aesthetic. And the way that it puts that into its music is just outstanding. It is one of the most like it's one of the albums that I listen to and I'm just like I am excited for the future of music because it's going to progress in a way that gives me shit like this and I fucking adore it. It's absolutely not for everyone. Like if you're not into any variety of extreme music, stay far away from this. But if you're in the right mood for it, nothing hits like this does. It also should be said, this album is very it's a little bit on the lengthier side, but something that they don't list in all of the versions of this album that stream is that the last 2 tracks are bonus tracks. One of them is a cover of progressive metal band Voivod's song, and the other one is just like I think of like a redo of like a demo or something. It flows very, very well and I think works within the context of the album, but I do feel that the beginning and ending works better holistically without those 2 things, but I can still enjoy them with both. The final track, whether or not you count it as a part of the album or not, is fucking bananas. It is the craziest metal song I have heard all year. It's fucking wild, and I love this thing to death. I hope more people listen to it, because it's outstanding. It's one of the best metal albums I've ever heard.
I want to particularly highlight the song Transmission to Mercury, which
Holy
is
shit!
insane. It is probably the most explicitly jazz song on the record.
Francis the Mute type beat.
And that about 3/4 of it is just a jazz song. And then the other quarter is like insane metal, but the whole of the record is kind of like that if both those bits are infused. It is crazy, it's fun, it's challenging. I adored it so much, and I want to thank Jake for recommending it to me.
Okay, now we're at the top 10 of the year, and number 10, August's album of the year.
Favorite album of the year was, of course, The Microphones in 2020, the only record I gave a perfect score to this year, and I feel very deservingly so. It is a record where I very much feel attached to the personal narrative being told. I find myself very easily caught up in just the scope and ambition of what this record is doing. I find myself in love with all the ways Phil's lyricism ties back into itself, how it creates a very circular, singular experience from this long record, which across it you as a listener have to ponder the choices being made. You have to really analyze and dissect a lot of the meanings behind decisions, like for instance the controversial 8-minute single chord progression opening. Really, and even beyond enjoying this record on an intellectual level, I find the personal narrative so engrossing, so fascinating. The pictures Phil paints, it's like watching a very good movie and being able to follow along with this that's presented in such vivid detail. And there's also the music video associated with this album that is quite good at giving you even further insight into just the minutiae and visuals of this project. I find myself all like whenever I throw this on, this is not a record I can put on in the background. This is a record I have to devote every fiber of my being at every second I am listening to it to. And it is always a rewarding enjoyable and emotional experience. I love it to death.
Yeah, I second all of that. It's very,
Mhm.
it's particularly bittersweet when you're familiar with, where Phil has come from and, the other Microphones records, because this is, of course, the first Microphones album in fucking 15, 16, 17 years.
17 years, yeah.
So there's and Phil has talked about at length about like how kind of, meaningless the labels are to him. He doesn't really like see much difference between what the Microphones did and what Mount Airy did. But he gives you some insight on this record into the sense of shift that he did feel at a certain point in his life, and how he's kind of come back to revisit those feelings in light of where he is now, artistically and as a person. And it's incredibly poignant, and Phil is just incredibly poetic and talented, and he writes in a very imagistic but beautifully direct way as well. And I think that is the greatest charm of Microphones in 2020 is that you get the sense of Phil's artistry as a performer and as a writer at its most distilled, its most pure, but also at its most referential and layered as well. I think it makes an interesting counterpoint to the more two-dimensional writing of some of his other more recent records that are kind of like dealing specifically with specific events happening to him in the present moment. Whereas this, you kind of get some of that, but it's also intertwined with historical references and imagery and just a whole bunch of other stuff that takes a lot to unpack. And it's just one of the most singular and interesting albums of the year.
It's an achievement, honestly, and it should be celebrated just because of how emotionally powerful and beautiful it is. I like listening to it on vinyl, by the way, is a fucking experience. It sounds real good. Highly recommend. This has only grown on me since we reviewed it on the podcast. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, so number 9 on the list now, another person's favorite album of the year, and of course mine. You know what it is. Took a while for me to really appreciate this, I think, completely, and certainly for it to become my favorite album of the year. For a long time there, my favorite album of the year was solidly the Jesse Weir record, which of course we will talk about soon. But I eventually come to realize that How I'm Feeling Now is the record that means the most to me this year. It's the record that I've ended up listening to the most. It is the first album we ever reviewed on this podcast. And I think that it's always kind of bugged me that it was so divisive, but now I've come to kind of like that in a sense, or like appreciate the fact that it's kind of divided us a little bit. To me, this album, and I talked about in the best songs video, I talked about Forever. I talked about specifically the relevance of Forever, the sense of place that song had when it was released in 2020, and the way that it kind of reflects all of the myriad emotions that we've all kind of experienced as a result of this year. But I think that it's to Charlie's credit that it is not just on that song that the record does that. The record does it consistently and in different ways. It is the most well-structured album she's ever released. In fact, I think that the structure and the flow of this record is something that is just not appreciated enough. Every single song here is both necessary and contributing to an overarching narrative that Charlie is telling with the story. You get the introduction, the controversial and memed introduction of Pink Diamond, which kind of throws you into the mindset of being kind of going stir crazy, sort of sitting inside and being an extrovert, or at least being someone who doesn't cope well with being contained, and kind of creating this world in which you can sort of go hard, like in which you can kind of express yourself in the way you used to. But there's also a sense of, with the drama of this track and how blown out it is, there's kind of a subtextual understanding that this is all kind of like hyper realized fantasy, delusion, a dream. And it's just a perfect introduction to this record. And then you get a string of songs from Forever to Enemy. So if you get Forever, Claws, 7 Years, Detonate, and Enemy. And these are all songs which look at Charlie's relationship with her partner. And then, of course, as I've talked about, Forever can be extrapolated to all kinds of relationships. But these are specifically about Charlie's relationship with her partner, who she has been with for 7 years, as the song suggests, and for whom this is the first time. This quarantine is the first time in that whole period where she's living with him for an extended amount of time. And these songs capture all the different emotions that you experience in a relationship when things are kind of accelerating. The connection that you have are kind of accelerating. You get Claws, which is this kind of cute and bubbly song about being in love and feeling attached and not wanting to be apart from them. And 7 Years is this kind of like more wistful reflection on how far they've come as a couple and the fact that they've gone through some real shit, but that means that's only brought them together and made them stronger. And then Detonate comes in, and it's like Charlie's self-doubt is setting in. The more time she's spending with this person, the less she feels like she deserves them, and the more she starts getting critical of herself and critical of her behavior in the relationship. And this leads into Enemy, which is a song about mistrusting your partner as a result of your own neuroses, feeling like because of the self-doubt you have that eventually all the flaws that you have, all the weaknesses you have are going to become inevitably apparent to this person, especially because you're living together in quarantine now, and it's only a matter of time before they realize all these awful things about you that you hate about yourself, and eventually they'll just fall out of love with you, or they'll become someone you can't trust. The arc of that across those songs is just incredible. And then I Finally Understand comes in, and it's like Charlie's going to therapy now. She's starting to understand, where she's at and how she can deal with these clashing emotions that she's experiencing and how she can move forward. But also, it's a song about fear as well. This feeling that I have might kill me. It might put me in the ground. And then you get a stretch of songs in the end of the record which expand from her relationship to her extroversion and her personality and her relationship with her friends and fans more broadly. C 2.0 is this song, which is actually a remix of a song on her last record called Click. And it takes a sample from that song. And that song was a song about going out to the club with your friends and just like being really out there and aggressive and having a great time. And it's sort of this really tuned up, fun song. But C 2.0 is kind of like the mirror image of that. It's like, in the quarantine now, I can't go out with my friends. We can't do anything. And it's like she's taken the template of the song that was about that celebration and she's kind of twisted it and turned it into something tragic and sad. And she sings in the song about how much she misses them and how much she wants to be with them, but that the spirit that they give her when they're together is still kind of giving her life now, even though they're apart. And then you get Party For You, which is obviously Forever was my song of the year. But if I had to pick another song on this record, it would be Party For You, which is just this absolutely fantastic song, one of the best songs she's ever made, about just like wanting to create that environment of a party at your home, but not necessarily getting that reciprocated, feeling kind of alone, isolated, let down either by friends or by partners, that feeling of distance that starts to set in. It's a very moving song. And then you get Anthems comes right in after it, and it's like, finally you've taken the neuroses, you've taken the wallowing, the fear, and you've turned it into something. You've created the party, you've created the club in your flat. And it has this great sense of like, it kicks off with her saying, "I'm so bored," and she just launches into this kind of like screed of like, it's almost like manic. She's talking about all of these ways in which she's trying to recreate the energy of going out through the mundanity of her life in quarantine, eating cereal, hanging out with her boyfriend, watching TV. All of these become recontextualized as ways of partying in this new context. And it's so fucking cool and clever and awesome. And then the final song, Visions, is kind of like, again, it's the it's the wrapping up of this whole experience and the looking forward and the waking up, and it ends with a sound that I believe is meant to evoke the sound of an alarm clock, but it's not like so direct. It's a little more subtle, and it's like the party is kind of like ending and you're kind of waking up into reality. And this whole album, I know I've spent so long discussing it, but I really wanted to get across how masterfully this album is put together. It's one of the most well-constructed albums in the pop world that I've ever heard. And it's just like, I've listened to it nearly every day of the last few months since it really clicked for me how perfect it is. And I don't mind that not everyone's into it, because it is very, it's a raw and incredibly idiosyncratic expression of Charlie's personality, right? So it's not necessarily, if you don't have a personality, or if you don't necessarily vibe with her personality, then you're not going to be on board with it. And she doesn't really mind that. But I do think it is the record where she is the most human that she's ever been on an album. She's stripping back a lot of the fun artifice that's associated with PC music that she's lent into over the years. And she's giving you something real, something that feels more like her. Ironically, more like her than her self-titled album did. It is just so beautifully emotionally dense, but also fun. The production is insane. The cast of production collaborators on this record is just incredible. And the fact that they are all utilized so well, and they all turn in some of the best beats and mixing of their career, and they all did it in an 8-week time frame, is just, it's so awesome. And I'm going to shut the fuck up now because I spent forever talking about it, but I've been thinking about this segment for weeks, because not only is this my favorite album of the year, this is one of my favorite albums of any year, and one of my favorite albums ever.
I share your appreciation, obviously not in the magnitude that you do, but I share your appreciation for it just because I listened to it like throughout the entire year. I listened to it just a couple of weeks ago just because when I was finalizing my list, and oh god, there's so many albums this year that captured how loneliness feels, and not a single one of them do it quite in the way that one does.
So let's move swiftly along then. I'll shut up for a bit. And number 8 on our list is
the sophomore effort from a very interesting French space krautrock group called Slift. This is their second LP, as I fucking already mentioned, you idiot. Uman. Uman is one of the most intense, heavy-sounding sonic journeys I think that you can be taken on from any album this year. I feel this is very much a case of an album that got kind of memory hold and lost. It was released right in February, right as quarantine started. So basically that shuts down all the buzz that this album would get, but you're hearing about it here, and it is marvelous. The sounds conjured up on this album are blistering. I recommend listening to this with just the best sound system possible to hear the technicality of every instrument, because that is really what you're being nourished on here. The lyrics, I could care less about what the lyrics are on this album. It just sounds so fucking cool. And I mean, even if you're there for the lyrics, they are very minimal. They just kind of get across an impression of this grander story, which is portrayed kind of just all in one image by the cover art of this album, which I think if you just have that in mind while you're listening to this, it evokes this wonderful sonic picture. Really, it's just an album you gotta sit down with, and you've gotta let it wash over you and then soak it all in, and the textures of it is just beautiful. Listen to it.
Yeah.
Notable for being one of the albums I gave a perfect score to this year. I agree with everything August said, obviously. And I think the reason that I gravitated towards it as much as I do, because, I don't just give a 10 to fucking anything, but, I feel like this was so important to me this year because it was one of the few musical experiences that, like, it's almost one of my favorite albums because of, for reasons that are completely irrespective of my other favorite albums this year, and that it didn't, like, speak to me in the here and now and, like, make me feel something in the sense that I, like, related emotionally to it. It instead let me escape. It is a full, complete transportation to another fucking world through sound. And the way it just did that to me every single time I listen to it, it is an experience that I find absolutely fucking invaluable. It is monolithic, it is cosmic, and it is so gorgeous, but it's also fun, and oh man, it's just a blast, and I love it so much. I adore it. I truly do.
Let's move on
Yes.
to our number 7 record, which is
Just one thing. Not afraid that it'll kill us, yeah. We are afraid that it won't.
Both me and Tyler waxed lyrical quite a bit in our review of the album initially. And I think it's safe to say, at least from both of our perspectives, it's only really gotten better with time. This is definitely, I think, the biggest grower in their catalog. It's their most sort of, or maybe not their most, but like it's definitely more on the sort of idiosyncratic and experimental side of the everything milieu. And as such, it kind of alienated parts of the fan base and even casual listeners, which I think is understandable. But I find that there's just so much to latch onto here, and there's so much to dig into. I think it's one of the most rewarding listens, not just of the year, but of their discography. And yeah, it's real good.
Yeah, it is. I have already said, and I stand by my statement that I think this is the best, or at least my favorite Everything album. It's only grown on me even more since I said that somehow. I do think it is a strange, off-kilter, and musically quirky record, perhaps more than anything they've done since Man Alive. But I think it is the most thematically cohesive and strong, and at times frequently very affecting record that John Higgs has written lyrically. Although there's obviously heaps of competition for that. It takes the kind of outward political fear and frustration of a fever dream, but turns it inward. And it's more of a kind of psychological journey through the darker side of yourself, trying to come out on the other side of that. But it also just has fucking so many bangers on it. Like, it's just their most banger-laden record, perhaps.
More than the planets.
It's just, but also, like, when it's not banging, some of the slower songs here, like Moonlight and The Actor, are just some of the most beautiful and musically just delectable songs the band had ever released. Like Moonlight's, the way that Moonlight starts from this gentle kind of bass lick and piano chords and crests with this incredible, maybe the most incredible vocal that John Hicks has ever put to record. It's just it's out of this world. And I already talked on when we reviewed Reanimator, I talked about The Actor, which I think is one of them, will continue to go down as one of the most underrated everything songs. I talked about the whether intentional or not, the trans parallel and the lyricism of that song that still fucking undoes me every time I listen to it. I think that, I think in particular that 3-song stretch at the end from In Birdsong through The Actor and then Violent Sun is one of the most emotionally heavy sequences on any everything record. That's just 3 emotionally overwhelming songs. You go from the fucking birth of human consciousness to the earth being consumed by a fiery ball in the final song. That's just an incredible little stretch within the record itself. And even outside of that, you've got songs that just explode into glitchy violence like Lost Powers and Lord of the Trapdoor. You've got these kind of like more mournful and depressive and lonesome songs like It Was a Monstering and Planets, and you've got the fucking climate change banger of Big Climb. This fucking album, I just fucking love it.
Big Fall.
Yeah,
Good, isn't it?
it's just so fucking good. Fucking good. Ah! Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of very good.
Yeah, I like
Oh,
it.
jeez. Number 6. Okay. Here's number 6.
But it feels so right when I feel your eyes. Maybe for tonight, can I feel your body? Baby, this is the time to step into my life.
This is a classic record. I don't know that anyone can dispute that. And
Well, I think you can dispute.
I don't-
it.
As much
It's not
as
a classic yet.
I was mid on it. It has since already become a classic record.
sorry, I was just fucking baiting. No, of course it can be disputed. It is a brand new record still, but it does carry that feeling of like, it just feels so instantly classic to me. We had a lot of disco revival records this year. We've talked about a lot of them. We've had Lady Gaga's Chromatica. We've had Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia. We've had Rasheem Murphy's Machine Machine. We've, of course, had the only other one of these that we've actually reviewed, Kylie Minogue's Disco. But I think that still, in light of all of that, Jessie Ware's What's Your Pleasure kind of stands as like a totem that represents the finest integration of those sounds with modern pop music this year. The bass lines on this thing are just fucking sick as fuck. The grooves are undeniable. It's a journey that makes me like, I feel like this record is probably what it was like to be around when Daft Punk's Discovery was released. It has that kind of immediate weight and impact as a dance record and as a record clearly indebted to disco and house music. So many iconic tracks on here, so many song of the year contenders. If you want to narrow it down to a particular stretch, the first 4 songs, Spotlight, the title track, Ooh La La, and Soul Control.
Yeah, no, that stretch is just
That's
undeniably
just like,
amazing.
That's just like, wow, you're hearing one of the best songs of its genre after another. And it's like, what the fuck? How is she doing this? Where did this come from? The fact that it sounds like a lost relic from that era, but fits in perfectly with the moment. Like, I think a great encapsulation of this is the way in which you have, if you watch the music videos for these songs, there's a lot of, GC takes great pains to feature people of color and queer people as the stars of the music videos.
Yeah.
And I think that is a great kind of encapsulation of the way in which GC's taken a classic sound and modernized it in a way that feels really urgent, relevant, current, and fucking fun. Like, this is one of the albums I've needed during this year to just absolutely forget about everything else going on and just indulge in some pure escapism. Well, we're here, the top 5 albums of the year, according to the podcast. And at number 5 is...
And it feel like get your ass down to the floor. You'll never know. You ain't so special when everything glows and it's so gone over you.
Clippings, Visions of Bodies Being Burned is, of course, a sequel record in a way to their effort from last year, There Existed an Addiction to Blood. But despite being a kind of air quotes sequel, Visions of Bodies Being Burned manages to stand entirely on its own as a fantastic hip-hop project. The production and beats across this thing, taking elements from both hip-hop and harsh noise and horrorcore hip-hop, are all melded together in such fantastical, unthinkably great combinations that it completely boggles the mind that a group of artists, that this group of 3, that this trio was able to to make this all work so well when the idea of harsh noise hip hop, well, no, more specifically, horrorcore harsh noise hip hop shouldn't work, and yet it does so well because Daveed Diggs is just one of the most impressive talents in the rap world right now, and I would say even ever. His flow is impeccable, his lyricism is very evocative, very interesting. There is so much to dissect and just think about the ways David ties just kind of classic horror movie references together into biting social commentary makes this album makes it just very, very even enjoyable and an intellectual record beyond just like listening to it and having fun. But you can also do that because just the beats, every beat, there is something new to discover the longer you listen to it, the way this record all comes together with the various references across tracks to each other. The storytelling here is just impeccable. It is one of the most mind-blowing experiences I've had this year with a record, and it has only gotten better and better for me since our initial review of it. Yeah, I could talk at length about every single song here, but I won't. It's just very, very good.
Whereas I feel like with their existed Addiction to Blood, there were loads of moments that were sort of noisy, and loads of moments were like horrorcore poppy. On this record, it's more of both at the same time, and it melds so beautifully.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I think what really elevates this record is the way that it kind of incorporates elements of their sound going back all the way to the earlier kind of pure noise days, like with their like mixtapes like Mid City and their first record where they were kind of like more kind of straight noise hop, if you like, and it was kind of like glitchy and shit. You're getting traces of that. You're getting traces of music concrete in songs like Eaten Alive. But you're also getting more kind of dance music. I think the stretch from Eaten Alive through Body for the Pile then into Enlacing, I think perfectly encapsulates what's so interesting about Visions of Bodies Being Burned. The way in which you're going from really extreme shit that's almost non-musical to stuff that could kind of like conceivably be hitting the club and getting your asses down to the floor. But yeah, it's just a remarkable record, comfortably their career highlight so far for me. Number 4 on our list.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 4 on our list. Speaking of records that are kind of like 2-part albums. We discussed some of the songs on these 2 records in our best songs video, and I think I remarked that it was really awesome to see the duo incorporate elements of their earlier sound in terms of the rhythmic stuff, the focus on rhythm and texture and the qualities of sound, but also with this new kind of brighter and more blown out and synth-based sound. And it's funny to like refer to any sound they make with the name of an instrument, because all of their sounds are made by hand nowadays. They don't actually use gear. They just make every sound from scratch by coding it all in Max. And so, I mean, you get them choosing to incorporate these familiar synthy textures into these 2 new records, which are Sign is less rhythmic focused, more focused around synth textures, and then Plus takes those synth textures and kind of warps them through some really fucked up rhythmic digressions. And there's been a lot of discussion on in the Autechre fandom about like what these albums mean, or like how these albums are supposed to make you feel, or how you're supposed to interact with these albums in relation to each other. And it seems to me that like Sign is this kind of mournful and sad and deeply emotive record, maybe the most emotive Autechre record to date. And then Plus is building. So like signs like the ashes of them having burned their career to the ground with the not to suggest that their previous records were bad, but in the sense that they were so definitive that they've kind of like lit a fire under their previous work. And Sign is just the immolation of their sound into a kind of bleeding miasma of synth tones and beatless melodies. And then it's like from the ashes of that you get Plus, which is like them rebuilding themselves, a new architecture for their sound. And so it just makes me really excited and intrigued for where they'll go next. But crucially, there are bangers aplenty on both of these records. There's also mournful moments. There's moments of contemplation. There's moments of total musical deconstruction, like on something like the Plus closer TM1 Open, which starts with this acidy, propulsive beat and ends in just like almost complete silence. Versus like on Sign, you get tracks like the incredibly bleeding F7, which just has these kind of blown out and cascading tones that collide with each other and sound like someone having a mental breakdown, or like an artificial intelligence having a mental breakdown, basically. It's music that I put on and I get different images, I get different feelings, different sensations the more time I spend with it. And it's just so fucking cool to have more Autechre records, I just fucking love that they're still doing this, like fucking more than 30 years into their career. They're still making shit that no one else can do and that doesn't sound like anything else they've done. Like it does sound, Absolutely. Some stuff is reminiscent of earlier stuff on a superficial level, but there's always something new about it. And yeah, I love it.
Absolutely, Tyler. And I also love both of these records from this year. I feel like part of why I love them is that they deepen my appreciation for Autechre by Sign showing me the more explicitly humanistic and emotional side of what they do, and then Plus showing me the humanistic side of what they do through their more complicated, beat-driven, oppressive means. And what you realize is that both sides of what they do are equally as emotionally driven and as human and as relatable as the other side. And that's I almost feel like that is the heart of what is like driving the creation and musical ideas in both of these records, is that they are saying both of these things simultaneously exist in our music,
Yeah, I think of Autechre's music like a Rorschach. Like you can listen to it, like it's the audio equivalent of a Rorschach. You listen to it and you see, each person sees different images, different feelings.
That's so true.
Scenes in the music, and that's what's
so true,
wonderful about it.
I've said that this is my favorite Autechre project collectively. I stand by that. It's just, it's very good. It's just very good.
Well, okay, let's move on then to our number 3 album of the year.
Top 3.
Yes.
The top 3. We are finally here. And first up,
oh Lord, they coming.
First up on the slate is, of course,
when I was talking about last week about All Time Low, I was talking about pop punk, and I said, is it just that the bands got worse or that I grew up? And I think whilst the bands I was really into when I was younger did get worse quite measurably, including All Time Low, I did also grow up. And what I've realised as I've grown up is that there are bands like The Wonder Years, for example, and Spanish Love Songs, and that frequently talks about what it's like struggling, to quote the album, paycheck to paycheck, which, yeah, I can relate to that, but probably not in the way of someone who doesn't have loaded parents in the way I do. And then, but I do also know what it's like to struggle. I have struggled with drugs, with unemployment, nearly with homelessness in the past. And this record knows what that's like, to have been dealt a shit hand and been forced to play it. this record can speak to everyone who has ever had to struggle for anything, I think, really. Especially in 2020. This record looks you in the face and it looks your depression and sadness in the face. It's like meeting with a best friend and looking them in the eye, and without changing your blank expression, explaining everything to them, and then they don't change their expression, but they just give you a hug and say it's okay. That's what this record is like. It accepts everything that's wrong, and it reminds you you'll get through it if you keep pushing it. And even if you don't get through it, you'll still be alive, and you'll have that to your name, which is not available to everyone.
The world's gonna kick you either way.
We're not broken. Life's just very long. So brave faces, everyone.
Truly the magnolia of pop punk.
Thank God this came out early this year.
Yeah.
'Cause fuck me. This is a year where most of the albums that I loved are albums that helped me cope with this shit. And I don't think that an album did that more brutally, honestly, than Spanish Love Songs, Brave Faces, Everyone did. I mean, like, this is an album that will tell you the truth, and the truth fucking hurts, but it also just understands that it's okay to feel like it hurts. And my God, is that just, like, you know, it's good to feel this kind of music and feel moved by this kind of music, because at some point you just feel like you're too old for this stuff to still resonate with you, and then music like this or The Hotelier comes along and you're like, oh my God, I can feel things again. Jesus Christ.
Or the new Jeff Rosenstock, for example.
Yes, also in that very same vein.
But I think like you could really just sum up the attitude of this record, the perspective, the outlook on life by looking at two song titles that mirror each other on this record. One of them is Self-Destruction as a sensible career choice, and the other is Optimism as a radical life choice. And I think that those two sentiments basically tell you all you need to know about what this album's going to do, how this album is going to affect you, and how this album looks at life and living and continuing, going on. It shows you the darkest parts of reality. It lets you sit with that. It lets you feel heard in that. Then it shows you the way through it. And it doesn't promise you that the way through it is going to work necessarily, but it reminds you that it exists. Okay, well, let's move on then. Without further ado, we all knew
Silver medal.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. We all knew what the two top albums of the year were going to be, but it was maybe a question of which order they would come in. But at number 2, of course, we have
Just want to point out that this is the only album of our top 20 to have a placement on the top 10 from all 5 of us.
Absolutely.
And so it's podcast number 1 in my heart. So once again, another album that I waxed lyrical about. I'm still very proud of that review.
As you should be.
You should be, yeah.
I think that, along with my pick for the worst album of the year, really brought out the best in me, I think. And so I will defer you to that, but I just want to reiterate that it's the fact that this band is still this good this many years into their career is just undeniable proof that they're one of the best to ever do it in any genre, even the one they made.
This really just takes all of the great things, turns them up to 10, and it makes it into such a fantastic package of tracks. And while I feel we have often cast this as like a career summary record, that is not to say it does not forge new ground within their discography. It stands entirely on its own as a just great Deftones album. It's intoxicatingly heavy. It is full of memorable riffs and lyrical moments. It's really just a powerful, overwhelming experience that you just... I think anyone who likes metal or music for that matter should just sit through, because it is well worth your time.
Yeah, I mean it's wholly one of a kind, even within this one of a kind band's discography. Yeah.
You know, Ohms is, of all the albums that I have listened to this year and loved, which is so many, for the first time, I did not have a more joyous and exciting and wondrous first listen to a new album that I hadn't heard before than I did Ohms. Like, it was, like, I was at work and Tyler had the FLAC files of every single track. And, like, eventually we all just broke down. We were all just like, yeah, share it. We need to hear it right now. I was at work while this was happening, so I was just like, I'm sticking in my Bluetooth, going into the stock room, and I'm fucking playing this shit. I don't give a fuck. So I went in, I got each of the files individually on Google Drive and listened to them in the player for that, and I just remembered I sat down in the corner of that little stock room, just sort of like got it here, closed my eyes, and then the light that automatically turns on when you walk in there turns off if there's no motion in there. And the second that Genesis started, the light turned off, and I was like, whoa! And like the first time I heard the opening riff on Urantia, I was just like, oh my god, this is amazing! And we were all freaking over, like we were all just fucking losing our minds in the main group chat of just like, holy shit, oh my god, we were going insane, and I was just like, this is the reason we made this podcast, is because we are a bunch of fucking nerds and we lose our goddamn minds over shit like this, and it was just so beautiful. And the fact that it ended up being one of the most emotionally poignant Deftones albums that they made, see our review for more of that, it just makes it all the better. Like, I couldn't have asked for anything better, because they were literally just like, hey, let's make a Deftones album for Jake. And I'm like, I mean, I'm flattered, but like, should I do something in return? Like, Chino, do you want me to meet you up in your hotel room? I'll do it.
I was in the capital city of my country about a month ago, and I decided, and every time I get on a plane, this is so stupid, but every time I get on a plane, I'm always thinking, when I'm sitting in the airport, I'm always thinking, like, what album do I want to be listening to when the plane takes off?
That's not stupid. I would be doing the exact same thing.
Okay, good. And so when I was coming home on the last trip, I decided to play Ohms as the plane was taking off, and it was like 7 p.m. and it was raining and it was like stormy, and we were lifting off the tarmac, and I timed it so that the riff in Genesis kicks in as we were taking off, and it was like, fuck, okay.
You left your body behind?
Yeah, I was like, I could have lifted that plane into the fucking sky myself in that moment.
Superman Returns shit.
I just love the way that riff comes in, and then you just hear Chino fucking screaming, I reject!
Take that, Antoine Fantoine.
May the power of Christ compel you.
The fact that I just failed that scream so epically is a testament to how fucking good Chino is.
I need a Tyler cover of Ohms stat.
The entire album.
I want specifically this link is dead, just because that contains the most screaming. So I want that.
I said in the songs video that what's so great about Ohms is the way it integrates all of the different variants of Deftones' singular sound. Like, you get the softer shit, you get the louder shit, you get the screaming, you get the whispering, you get just everything happening on this record to some extent. But you also get like really funky, interesting details that you wouldn't normally expect as well. there is just so much to love about Ohms. It is quintessential Deftones. It feels like a band trying to make a definitive statement, but also being like, this deep into their career. And when you're living in the shadow of records like White Pony and Diamond Eyes, and still managing to create something that feels this definitive is no small feat. And you can definitely feel the energy of a band that are still annoyed that Gore came out the way that it did, and want to make sure that no one doubts for a fucking solitary second that they can fucking destroy. And that's what you get consistently across all 10 of these tracks. I think it was another album I talked about. It was actually when we were talking about Dogleg, I said in the songs video, I said Dogleg's Melee is an album where it's like 10 tracks that are just constant fucking assaults and they never let up. And I think Deftones make the decision to do that here as well. Although, again, you get more variety and you do get sort of softer passages. But generally speaking, each track here is hard and fast and fucks you. And it's basically everything that anyone could want from a Deftones album. And it fucking deserves it to be this high.
The goat.
I think part of the reason it's so satisfying too is that you were talking about how like it's just its place and how it's doing all these things. Like in many ways, I think this is Saturday Night Wrist fully realized. I know that might not be a popular take with you two, but I think in how eclectic it is and how it is trying so many different things, but how it executes all of it so flawlessly with the finesse that I think that album just undeniably doesn't quite have.
Yeah, well, like that album's also like coked to shit and like and they're all really fucked in the head. Whereas this is a like very clear-headed record. That's
fair.
I can't say I agree at all.
No,
just because they're so not because I
that.
not because I disagree with your point, but more just that I just think that they're so wildly different.
I mean, every Deftones record is really too different from each other to really do that with. But I just mean I mean it very broadly is what I mean.
Yeah. All right.
Well,
number one. It couldn't be anything else.
Really?
Here it is.
the thing is with Punisher is that this album is basically like ubiquitously a hit amongst everyone. Like it might not be everybody's album of the year per se, but this is just, it's done well in every possible circuit that you can do well in. So, having this be our album of the year might even be a little anticlimactic to some, just because it's like, yeah, fucking course, everybody loves that goddamn album. But I must say that, like, it is through no small feat of the album itself that it managed to do this so widespread, because it is such a niche thing. It is, basically Phoebe has replicated the success of famous singer-songwriters, the likes of which are considered legendary now. Like, this is the type of success you would have seen from an Elliott Smith if Elliott Smith was still making, alive and kicking and making music. It's a very specific area of the musical world, and it's so easy to make content like this that is emotionally charged, that is subtle, that is personal, but it is also quiet, it is also understated, as things like the new Bright Eyes album proved, that it's like you can do that, and you can do it well, but doing it well is not enough. You have to put yourself into this in every way, and it has to be felt. It has to resonate among people. And I think that's the thing, is that Punisher, I would argue, is the album of the year for 2020 for everyone, not just this podcast, not that just for me. This is just the sound of loneliness. This is the sound of yearning. This is the sound of being alone in your room in the middle of the night and wishing that you were fucking anywhere else in the world. And, it does capture all these things so broadly, but on like a just track-to-track basis, there's so much to love and admire about such simple songs that upon first glance, you might not think all that much of. But when you listen to something like Garden Song and you hear the lush arrangements, the beautiful production, the amazing lyricism that Phoebe weaves throughout the entirety of the record, and the way it sort of has these emotional climaxes with songs like Kyoto, songs like Chinese Satellite, songs like Graceland 2, where it sort of picks you up from where the other records have knocked you down. And just on a more personal note, I have been very open about everything I've gone through in the past life, my life, my whole fucking life. I've basically spilled a lot of shit that I had never told a living soul before, ever. I've divulged things on this podcast that I've never told Morgan. And I feel like Punisher was what broke the dam for me. It sat me down and confronted me in a way that no other piece of art did, as somebody who left a terrible, terrible toxic relationship that left them broken, battered, unsure, and withered. It was soul food that I needed more than anything in the world, and it's been my crutch this year. I've listened to this album, mathematically listened to this album according to fucking Last FM, a bare minimum of 80 times. I want you to take that in for a moment and consider how much I have to listen to an album from start to finish to hear it 80 times in the less than 9-month span that it's been out.
That's
It
probably
is
more than I've listened to my personal favorite record. I want you to know.
probably
It's-
undoubtedly.
That's roughly 240 hours of listening.
Yes,
Not
and it's a lot. And I'm obsessed with it. And I know it like the back of my hand. Like, I hear the opening chords to every song 5 seconds before they happen. These songs are, I'm Edward Norton in Fight Club. It was me. That wasn't just stuff in there. It was me. But I mean it sincerely. And like, I've not exactly hidden it, but I consider Punisher to be my favorite album ever. I have not had an experience with a record that is this profoundly emotional, that is this comforting, this scary, this brilliant. It's not just a singer-songwriter record for me. It's not just a good album from a good artist for me. It's like looking into the monolith from 2001. It's like seeing somebody take all of my emotions and spread it across some fucking picture that only I know how to understand. And it makes it feel like it was made for me. It's one of those albums that it's just like, God, I'm glad that it's gotten the acclaim and success that it did. And I'm glad that pretty much everybody here loves this in a similar way that I do. And in some ways, I even like that not everyone's connected with it, because it proves that it's like a fallible piece of art, that it's just like everything else. And I think that's important to remember a lot of the time. But it also is something that's just like, if only I got to love this, if it was only me and everyone else in the world hated it, it means so much to me. I don't care. I don't care. And that's the beautiful thing about it. It's so... You just take a look at the cover, and you take a look at the image of Phoebe in a fucking weird skeleton footy pajama staring at the sky while this weird fucking light just goes over her, and it's just this encompassing feeling, this standing in the middle of a chasm where you're confronted by nothing but the stars and the sky, and it's beautiful, but it's so quiet. And there's not been a piece of art that I have experienced this year that I've taken more comfort in. And as somebody who, I struggle with anxiety, I struggle with depression, I have struggled with getting out of a terrible relationship that has impacted the way that I behave even now, and it has been a hard year. It is December, and I'm tired. And there is nothing more important to me in the world than something that can tell me that everything will be fine and mean it, because it's so easy to be facile, it's so easy to be surface level, it's so easy to just say these things and be comforted by them just because somebody said them. But it's also something to feel like they mean it and to feel seen. And I feel like that it's incorporated to the concept of what the album is. It's Punisher. Punisher is a song that Phoebe has elaborated upon that is about the relationship that artists have with the people who consume their art. And the fact that me being such a virulent fan of this album and of Phoebe, it's poetic and weird, and I have to confront that part of myself that depends on art for what I do. But like, I'm a manic depressive bipolar. I'm a mess. I feel everything to a 10. I have so many emotions. I have so many feelings. They are big. I lug them around with me every single second of every day. And so many times throughout 2020, they have felt like they are heavier than I can carry. And Punisher makes them feel like they aren't that heavy anymore. And that's it.
Ah.
Carla, go.
Yeah. So, Punisher is an album about existing in your isolation, being alone, but also kind of not wanting to be alone, but wanting to be alone, but staring up at the sky and seeing it, desperately trying to find communion in something that isn't tethered to the world around you. It's a record also about processing your emotions. And it's a, and and in a way, it feels like the whole. Obviously, the whole record builds to the final track, but it feels like in a way that the final track is kind of the culmination of a lifetime of not being able to process, trying to grieve, trying to move forward, trying to be happy. And I listened to Punisher. I played it to my partner, actually, who I didn't think would enjoy it, but did, thankfully. And we were listening to it on a drive through the wilderness. And when it finished, she told me about, because she's really into classics and ancient history and stuff. And so she told me about the story that was told in a play, in an ancient Greek play called Agamemnon. And there's this character in the play who called Cassandra, actually, was her name. And she was granted the power by Apollo to see the future, but she was cursed by the fact that no one would believe her predictions. And so basically this tragic figure who is isolated in her own way, who has this kind of ability and this special and unique thing about her, but it's not really appreciated or understood by anyone else around her. And in the play, she's eventually murdered. And as she's being murdered, she wails, otototoi, which is, I don't know what it means. It's just a word that was given for this absolute inhuman wail of grief and of a lifetime of built up suffering and not being understood and not having a place and being denied, whether by people or whether just by the cruelty of the universe, from having the sense of contentment and happiness that you've always wanted. And it's this scream that is meant to kind of encapsulate all of that, a lifetime of it. And my partner told me when Punisher finished that when she heard Phoebe let out her primal scream at the very end of this record, it made her think of that. And it felt like the same kind of thing. It was like, and it's only more impactful for how quiet the rest of the record is. The rest of the record, you are simmering in an emotionally tense state, but also a quiet state, a minimal state. It's a record that benefits greatly from how beautifully composed its minimalism is and how exceptionally mixed it is as well, so that you feel every detail and even the slightest bit of reverb, like you hear, for example, the beginning of on the opening lines of Chinese Satellite, or throughout the record, just tiny little details that feel like mountains of meaning. But basically, the record sort of simmers in this mode of quietness, and then it just erupts at the end. And what that feels like is it feels like the cathartic expression of a lifetime of built up emotions, and it's more impactful for what precedes it. And it's one of the most affecting endings to any record or work of art I ever heard.
That's
And
a perfect parallel.
and it just, yeah, I love this record, but I just feel like in that scream that she lets out at the end of it, you almost don't even need the rest of the album, but the rest of the album just makes it more impactful. But it's like, how fucking dope do you have to be as an artist to fucking capture the entire spectrum of human emotional experience in one fucking noise and put it at the end of your album? How fucking dope do you have to be able to do that? How do you fucking do that? Phoebe Bridgers did that.
It's like she's hot too, so it's just like, what? How? Get out!
Stand the bisexual queen.
Yeah, it's an album, and I'm glad it's the #1 album of the year for our podcast, because I couldn't think of anything that more encapsulates, for all the reasons that Jake has said, even though not everyone here is a huge fan of it. But I still feel like the whole, it just makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, it really does. I mean, you said
No,
it best
because it's
too.
not even like about the sound of it. It's just about like what Phoebe channels on this feels like the same energy as what we channel every time you record an episode of this podcast.
You see, you get my connection now. You understand why this was just amplified by a billion. And you also spoke beautifully to the technicality of the record, which I think is just like when I think of things I love about this album, like just on a sonic level, I just think of the little wisps of ambient noise on Halloween. I think of the tiniest excruciating detail which I have picked up on over and over and over again on these songs, and it's just like it's not just because of these emotional appeals, which it has. It's skillfully put together, but it's a nexus of everything, and it is beautiful because of that.
So I'm going to talk about this record for a bit, if that's okay. But I'm also going to talk about myself quite a lot. I've talked a lot about myself on the podcast before. It's going to be the first time where I really am deeply, historically personal. So I was expelled from school when I was 16 for doing drugs on school campus. This was a school that I had been at since year 3, which is 8 years old for those of you who aren't in England. I've been at the school for a total of 8 years and was expelled from school for doing drugs on campus. A lot was going on when I was 16. My father only had one brother called Richard, who was an alcoholic, nicotine addict, and gambling addict, who I met for the first time since I was younger than 2, when I was 16. And the only reason I met him that year is because he was dying of a lung disease. That year also was the height of my, I don't want to say who's their struggle, but it's a close family. They were struggling with anorexia quite badly in my household. My parents didn't know how to deal with it. My father had rediscovered a problem with alcohol that he'd purposely left behind when I was born, when my sister was born, actually, who's 2 years older than me. And I was, for the first time ever, at the age of 16, struggling with my burgeoning sexuality with regards to multiple genders. Much of this can be found on Punisher, from parental relationships in Kyoto. Phoebe Bridgers recounts an example of a father wishing her brother a happy birthday 10 days too late. My father has never done this, but there's an emotional truth here that I relate to. That year, I had to excuse myself from many lessons due to a constant problem with headaches that later revealed itself as generalized anxiety that was diagnosed only after I'd been expelled. At that sixth form, there was a friend in the group. At that point, I didn't know I was trans. I was still referring to myself as James. This other person was also called James. And he later found out that he might be a clinical sociopath. And we were best friends at this point. I felt like whenever we were together with our mutual friends, he would hold counsel. And I loved him to a degree. And what ultimately amounts to a borderline personality disorder, I judged to be something worthy of demonization, which I will forever regret. Because I don't think he was a bad person, but after a certain point, his girlfriend, who I had a huge crush on, told me that he had been abusing her, and I will forever regret how I dealt with this problem, because it wasn't healthy. This relationship, amongst others, has given me not insignificant trust problems, and not insignificant problems with trusting my own ability to judge the actions of others. When I was at university, I fell into a group of people who really supported me and made me feel loved. But I had one friend whose name shall not be mentioned, who I'm still in touch with, who I had intimate relations with, who informed me that they were in an on and off relationship with one of the group who was being emotionally abusive towards them again. And I'll be fucked if I knew what to do. And I had another group of friends that were in the queer scene in that city, which is a long way away from where I am right now. And I grew to have a severe mistrust of certain members, which eventually wrenched a group apart because of mistakes I made. I want to comment on the relationships with toxic friends I had, because this album comments so deeply on what that felt like to me. With songs like Moon Song and Punisher and Halloween and Savior Complex. That spoke to me so deeply on what all of those relationships felt like, that have defined my life for the last... I'm 22 now, so 8 years of my life I have been defined by the toxic actions of others. And songs like Graceland 2 and I Know the End and Garden Song give me the confidence to define my own life, which I've done now in 2020 amongst the horrible crucible that COVID has been. And no album has captured the emotional tone of self-determination in hell that 2020 has been. And no album has captured what my trauma feels like in this album. You know, baby, it's Halloween, but we could be anything. That line, to me, says that why do we have to be how we are in this horrible cycle? So we could redefine our relationship among any number of lines. I'm currently reading J.G. Ballard's novel Crash, which is about a magnanimous, id-driven personality that consumes everyone around them. And I've been subject to that consummation too many times. And I think that's what this record is really about at the heart. The Punisher, as much as Phoebe says it is certain types of people, the Punisher at the heart of this record is the kind of person that subsumes all of the personalities around them and holds court with everyone and expects to be the court leader. And too many times I personally have tried to fill that void. I try to become the person who holds court with friends because I feel like I so desperately need that attention, and in that I feel like I'm encouraging the continuation of cycles of toxicity that have damaged me. And all of that's in this record. And that's been me.
It's a good record.
Thank you for sharing all of that with us.
I don't feel like I'm the same person that I was when we began this. One final thing, just to put a stamp on my thoughts on this year and Punisher to bed and you all, is that when I talked about Chinese Satellite, that moment on that album that first reduced me to tears, when she says, "I swore I could have feel you through the walls," it hurt me because I remembered what I felt like when I missed somebody who didn't care about me, and I wanted to feel them. I wanted to feel warmth or love or something, and it just wasn't there, and it just recalled that pain so very, very vividly. And now I realize why I've sort of gone through this journey with this record and that song, and why it's so important is because, and being like in lockdown and isolation in my room so fucking much, is that it's not the people who hurt me that I want to feel connected to, or that when I imagine myself feeling something through the impenetrable fortress that is my mind and room, the presence that I feel, the thing that I want to connect with, is you. It is not the things that hurt me. It is not the people that treated me like garbage. It is not everything that I hate and feel tethered to still. It is the things that love me. And it is you.
Well, that's our TeaPodcast favorite records of the year. Thank you all for sticking with us through our countdown of the top 20 albums of the year. Please let us know, what do you think of the albums that we've discussed today? What are your favorite albums of 2020? Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, and if we didn't mention an album you really love in this video, it sucks. It doesn't deserve to be mentioned. It's bad.
And
yes, even the ones we didn't mention that we love.
On the brief note of acknowledging our audience, I think that it's sort of appropriate that we say we are, in all honesty, very thankful for the attention and support that we have gotten this year. We would be nowhere without you, and the fact that anybody has wanted to listen to what we have to say, shown us support, followed us, and partaken in the things that we've wanted to do, I am infinitely grateful to have participated with not just my co-hosts here, but with you as well, because it is a journey that we have taken together, and I am very, very happy that it is one I have not gone on alone.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Same to all of you, and here's to a great year 2021. Hopefully.
Good music.
Please.
Look forward to that.
Yeah.
Please.
To good music.
Yes.
Here is to the Jamsty podcast in 2020.
Yes.
One sec. Liquid drink.
The
Yeah.
Jamsty podcast in 2020, the best Phil album record. And on that note, rock over London.
London.
Rock on
Chicago.
Pringles. They're chips.